Welcome to the 2023 Global DEI Conference, where we unite under the banner of diversity, equity, and inclusion, brought to you by Ludo and One Business World. We are going to be diving into some crucial dialogue to contribute to a more equitable and inclusive world. And today I am delighted to welcome Cynthia Fortlage, who is a gender diversity speaker, writer, and fractional consultant supporting inclusive organizations at the intersection of human rights. And not just that, but Cynthia is our first speaker of day 2 of our conference. So she is in a very special position to kick things off today. Cynthia, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you so very much. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. My name is Cynthia Fortlage, and I'm going to be taking you through a journey that I call One Leader, Two Genders. Now, in this journey, I do want to put a caveat that what I'm going to be talking about are what I have learned through my own personal journey of being one leader with two genders worth of experience. So it's not about an ideology or theory, it's my life we're discussing. And so it is of a very personal nature that I share these experiences with you. Now, a little bit about me so that you get to know me. Because of the nature of our conversation today, I can't take your responses, but what I'm going to do is read out 10 facts about myself. And what I'd like you to do is think of which one stood out for you. It's always intriguing to hear. So here you go. I am a Belfast girl born in Northern Ireland, but living in London. I have over 30 years of business experience. I was a C-suite technology executive. I'm a multi-award winning executive. I have been a speaker at over 450 events in over 30 different countries globally. I became a transgender woman at the age of 50. I was married for 32 years. I have 2 adult children. I learned to fight for women's rights before I ever learned to fight for LGBTQ plus rights as the national board chair for a feminist organization in Canada, hence the accent. And finally, currently, I'm a board member with Outright International based in New York City who fight globally for LGBTIQ human rights. They are also the United Nations Secretariat for LGBTIQ issues. So take a second and think which one of those facts about Cynthia stood out to you. Now, the reality is, in 2016, which was the year that I came to my life epiphany and came out, the only answer that I got was, oh my God, you were a transgender woman at the age of 50? Yes. And I talk about the idea that if all someone sees is what might be different about me, much like a book, you're judging this book by its cover, that you miss all the great chapters and content within. And that's what I hopefully shared with you, is a little bit of insights as to the great chapters and content that I bring into the conversation. Now, I want to introduce you to acceptance without understanding. That's not a mistake. This is my raison d'etre, my purpose for being. And really, it fundamentally underpins all of the work that I have done with almost 500 clients in the diversity space. And the idea is, it's not about agreeing with someone, and it's not about tolerating. Nobody wants to be tolerated. That's not a nice word. I just want you to accept that I'm a human being. That's it. You see, that's so powerful, because if you can accept that I'm a human being, then that means you agree as a human being that I deserve human rights. And because human rights are about equity, not equality, and all of us are unique, wonderful, individual people, each of us will have a different requirement of our human rights, and therefore we will equitably consume our human rights. And in doing so, when we get to that place, we obviously don't need to talk about human rights, but it allows us to create the beginning of a safe space that allows us to have dialogue. And it is through that dialogue that we can come to understanding. Not agreeing. That's not what it's about. It's about accepting the human being for who they are. We don't know someone's history. And quite honestly, for many of us, we are so complex, we don't even know our own history. And so I ask you, as it says on the left, to start with acceptance without understanding. But through this communication and safe space, we grow to acceptance with understanding. Now, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. And the gender unicorn really helped me figure out a whole bunch of aspects about my own personal identity, such as my gender identity, that part of my brain that was developed before my genitalia through the gestational process, because they happen at different points. And you know what? Lady Gaga is right. We're born this way. So the idea that my identity that I was born with was female, even though through the gestational, a different set of chromosomes had fired, and I ended up having male genitalia. My gender expression, much like yours, is how we dress and represent, the way we wear our hair or makeup or our voice. Um, those are all characteristics associated with our expression. And there is the sex assigned at birth, and there is female and male. But in this conversation, everybody keeps forgetting the intersex community. And certainly here in London, where I live, the UK government has on their website, when they talk about, gender transition and so forth, they have a section where they say they see that intersex people exist. And by the way, they account for about 2% of the population compared to 0.5% of the transgender community in this conversation. And so we have about 2% of the population, but the government says they have to pick a binary of male or female. They don't handle anything else. Canada, where the accent's from, they have an X indicator on ID documents, so they do deal with allowing other options to identify. And then when we talk about our sexuality, there is the element of who we're physically attracted to, but who we were emotionally attracted to. And they may not be the same person. And that's why we get a whole bunch of different sexualities in this conversation. As an example, there's 29 defined sexualities, or 58 defined gender identities. And I know I have seen people talk about lists with 100. Look, I can tell you that in 8 years in community, in meeting thousands and thousands of people, I've only ever had to remember about 10 different identities. Can I define all the others? No. So whether the list is 58 or 158, it doesn't matter. I only need to remember the one for the person that I'm interacting with. And if I don't know, I can ask them. But I thought it's really important on this slide to talk about the two-spirited, especially for folks who are in North America, because the two-spirited community, and by the way, of course, these are English words being in England as colonizers that we're putting upon the community. It is not their natural language. And in doing so, the two-spirited community, which is the way that they see themselves, rather than necessarily using the LGBTQ plus, or what I love to call my rainbow alphabet. And the two-spirited community is a powerful lesson in this because of two things. The first is that the elders of the two-spirited communities have taught me that the simplest language in the two-spirited life had 5 words for gender. They had female and male, female but male, male but female, and neither male nor female. So today, the words that we use of non-binary, gender non-conforming, they're accounted for in this language, and that's the simplest. There's other versions that had 7 words to understand that. But what is so important is to realize that that history and that use of language dates back 8 to 10,000 years ago. So this is not new. This has existed before many things have existed. And it's simply just a way for us to start grasping that what is really new is the idea that we talk about things in an binary set of options. Now, if that's not enough, when we talk about sex chromosomes, because that is biological, the fact is there's 25 known regular sets, not two. And it's not just X's and Y's. There's an amazing TED Talk that talks about this, and it's absolutely fascinating. And I thought it was intriguing that the sex chromosome is the only chromosome that's named, not numbered. And only 4% of anything it does has anything to do with sex and gender. So probably not properly named in the first place. Now, grasping that, I wanted to take a step forward and talk about this idea of the trans. And if you're kind of trying to keep up with your language, you might see that these days we're using trans plus. And that's because some folks are finding that the trans umbrella, when we talk about that, trans is just short for the word transgender. So transgender is just a very broad group of people. They're only 0.5% of the population, but they represent a number of different identities. Now, in 2016, I was told when I came out and I was discovering my identity, I was finding my label, if you will. That would help me on my journey. And this chart teaches us some really key things. The first is on the bottom, who's not part of this conversation? Well, cisgender folks. I promise you, it's not a slur. Cisgender in Latin meaning to agree with. So the idea is that if you are cisgender and we're in a conversation where gender identities matter, knowing who cis and trans may be relevant. Definitely when we talk about topics impacting women, we're all women. Some are trans, some are cis. And in doing so, it's just a matter of recognizing that you agree with the identity given to you at birth. That's it. We have cross-dressing. I was a closeted cross-dresser for 43 years. So I have a lot of experience with this. And the issue with cross-dressing is that it very rarely has anything to do with identity. Not completely, but for the most part, and certainly in my own personal experience, it had nothing to do with my identity until one day when I was about 48 years old and I looked in the mirror and I was dressed in the privacy of my hotel room. And I looked in the mirror and said, who is she? And what is her name? And that was the first time that I had this aha moment of a question of identity, not a question of sexuality. Now, drag performers, thankfully, drag is very much a part of British culture in what they call pantomimes, so pantos for short. And this is panto season coming up. So there are lots of actors and so forth that are putting on productions where there's the idea of going in drag or cross-dressing in some cases. And they're performance artists because what they're doing is putting on a caricature. And by the way, if you ever need to do fundraising, they are some of the most absolutely amazing fundraisers you would ever meet. And we already talked about our friends, the intersex community, so we don't have to go over them again. But if we look at the top of this, under the transgender umbrella, or trans umbrella for short, who do we have? Well, we have the two-spirited community, and we talked about that. We have lots of other identities of gender fluid, gender queer. That's part of those 58 different defined identities. We have trans feminine, masculine, trans man, trans woman, and then transgender on it. But you'll notice I put in red transsexual because you see, when I came out in 2016, I was told, well, that's an old word that we don't actually use. Well, the fact is that word was created by Magnus Hirschfeld in his gender clinic in Germany, pre-war. And what we found was that he had created two words in his practice. One was transvestite, which is an old term for crossdresser. And transsexual was the other word. And so as a transsexual person, I required medical and surgical intervention in order to affirm my gender identity. Not everyone does. And that's okay. That does not invalidate their identity. It just simply means they didn't need what I did. So the idea of the trans plus is to include words that we might have eliminated, but in doing so, we're actually eliminating part of the community. And so I include words like transsexual back into the lexicon and recognize that the trans umbrella is the trans plus umbrella so that we are fully recognizing everyone's unique identity. And as it says on the left, we do not define someone's gender identity, they do. And that's part of acceptance without understanding. So, okay, I'm going to ask you not to take a whole journey, nor am I going to ask you to take a little step. In fact, I love this quote because this quote actually comes from Lao Tzu from the 6th century BCE, a Chinese philosopher. And it's actually a journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And right, any journey begins with the first step. And so we need to celebrate each and every step. But today, I'm actually going to ask you to take a giant leap with me. You ready? This is my after and before picture. What I want to do very quickly is to share with you two very quick stories to share with you how life has changed so dramatically. And I think you'll find for many women that are on this session, they will be able to relate to the stories because it is irrelevant as to whether we are cis or trans. Our identities as women is what's really impacted in these experiences. The first is I regularly get asked, what was the first recognition of the loss of male privilege? And the answer is simple: safety. Gentlemen, see if you can even relate to this, because this never existed in my world before. I had to learn within 1 week of being my authentic self, of looking down the street to see who's walking towards me, be cautious of who's walking behind me, might be following me, who's on the other side of the street that might be coming across the street, making their way towards me. What are the exits on the street? I can tell you in North America, I love to wear my heels all the time. In London, wear flats. You take your heels to a venue, you don't wear them unless you're taking a taxi. But the idea is, do you kick your shoes off? Do you use them as a weapon? All of these questions related to safety, not walking down, in England, we would say the high street. In North America, we might say the main street. When you're walking down the street, middle of the day, surrounded by people, safety is a part of that. But this conversation with ourselves and the concern of safety begins the moment we walk out our front door. And I have met many, many, many people, and all but one woman that I've ever met says that she gets that story. The second I want to share with you really quickly is the experience in the boardroom. Now, in the boardroom, it was amazing because we used to have ideation sessions that would go on. And in the ideation sessions, they were part of our regular board meetings. And we would talk about the finances, we would talk about the business of the day. And then there was a problem opportunity that was brought to the table. And the 6 executives, 3 female, once I was there, and 3 male, we began to ideate on the problem. And in this instance, this was in my role as the head of technology. So you can kind of imagine technology is very involved in a lot of the business. And what ended up happening was we started the session, the problem was defined, and the next person went and built on that, and the next person, and so on. And it was my turn. And I put my idea on the table, and there was complete silence. Not even a, Now, the gentleman beside me, a good friend, I'll talk about him in a second, he reiterated what I had said, and everybody loved it. And the ideation session continued and built and kept going. And in that moment, For the very first time, I was faced with, do I say, excuse me, that was my idea? And then I might be called that petty little you know what, just looking to be acknowledged. Or because I put the idea on the table for the purpose of helping the business, do I just keep quiet? For the simple reason that as the owner of that portfolio, it's going to come back to me. Well, it did. And it did come back to me. And I didn't go talk to my friend right away. What I did is I waited till the afternoon. And I went and I talked to him and I said, what we normally had done is that each of us at times get very passionate about the ideas that we bring to the table. And we had learned working together to translate for each other and restate each other's ideas to ensure that the rest of the group could hear us. And for him, he felt that's all he was doing. And I told him, like, you took my voice. As a woman, you have taken my voice. I said it would really help next time if you could say, I really like Cynthia's idea and restate it. I don't need to ask for acknowledgement. You've already done that at the table. Or if you want to ideate on it, you could say, I really like Cynthia's idea, but I want to, build on it and then share your idea. And in both instances, I don't need to do it. But it was that moment that I realized that while I still had a seat at the table in my executive role, I no longer had a voice and needed a male ally to ensure that I was actually heard. So, what are 5 things that I wish I knew or that my employer knew when I came out? Well, the organization did not have employee resource groups based upon various diverse characteristics, so there was no place to go for support and guidance. I had to work with HR, and in fact, I was the first trans employee of the company, and I happened to be an executive, not the formula that they thought. Are there company policies in place to provide the framework for you? I would have told you before that, sure, we were ready. But when I was faced with being on the other side of that conversation, they weren't ready. And I had to help create communication plans. And in fact, through the first year with clients and suppliers and industry, I had to out myself about 700 times because that was the communication protocol we had agreed to. Because you see, as an executive, my personal brand and reputation is associated with the organization, and they weren't sure how to handle it. Do you have trusted parties that you can approach and share? Yes, it could be coworkers or a manager, could be HR, but these are folks who they're your support. When days are rough, and these are the people you want that are rallying around you. Absolutely required. Are there laws in your region that provide protection for you? Absolutely something that everyone should know. And unfortunately, through life's lessons, what is the best, not the easiest path for you to take? So I want you to be like a clock. I know you're going, Cynthia, what does that mean? You see, a clock knows that it has history, but it can't go backwards. A clock is being designed for one thing, to move forward through time. So when we feel stuck, that we can't understand, that we're struggling to understand, so we can't accept, remember to invert that. Learn to accept without understanding. Or that you were talking to someone about their identity and you go, I don't get it. It's not for you to get. It's simply for you to accept this human being in front of you. You don't need to be mates or best friends. You just simply need to coexist and work together. That's it. And so when we are stuck in those moments, we need to be like a clock and learn to find our way to move forward, even as I learned if it means leaving family behind. Now, I love this diagram about allyship, but we're tight on time, so I'm going to give you my 3 great things to do tips and 3 things not to do tips. So first, I want you to stand shoulder to shoulder, not in front. And simply because I want you to uplift me to be equal to you. If you've learned something here, probably means you have something to unlearn. And we need to be cautious of language. Hi, guys, while it's very colloquial, is not, unfortunately, not gendered. It is gendered. So saying hi, team, hi, everyone, hi, folks, all of those are great substitutes when you come in and you're saying good morning, even sometimes rather than just saying, to say good morning, and you don't need to actually even add a qualifier. And then 3 things to stop. I hate to say it, but my mother was right. I have 2 ears, 1 mouth. I'm supposed to use them in proportion. If we want to be an ally for a group, we need to listen more than we speak. We need to stop accepting our biases. We all have them. And when we see injustice and we feel safe, to speak up. But I see Elizabeth is back with us. So we must be approaching the magic hour. Hi, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. That was an absolute joy to listen to you speak, and I learned so much. And I think we can all take such big takeaways. The one thing that jumped out for me is every journey begins with the first step. It feels so obvious, and yet that giant leap is what is required.
Yeah,
Cynthia,
absolutely.
thank you. That's been incredible today. I really appreciate you joining us today for the Global DEI conference.
You're welcome. Thanks. Enjoy, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.